Nearly 4 days after the crippling explosion, as Apollo 13, against all odds, seemed about to make it home, Mission Control discovered something potentially devastating.
The spacecraft was drifting off the trajectory you wanted.
The spacecraft was drifting off, and we didn't understand what was happening.
Apollo 13 was going to come in too shallow, bounce off the Earth's atmosphere, and be lost forever.
We have to perform another emergency maneuver.
The engineers calculated the precise direction and amount of rocket thrust needed to correct the course. Then the crew had to make it happen, firing the rockets manually, steering by sighting the Earth and Moon through the windows. Nobody had ever done that before.
This was a team effort, right? I mean, you're handling one aspect, trying to keep the Earth from moving up and down, and
Fred Haise was going, to keep it from going sideways, and of course he's sick at this time. And Jack is timing it because our clock had stopped, of course.
Were you worried at all, Gene, that after all they had been through over those 3 or 4 days, the cold, the sleep deprivation, the tension and the stress, that they may just make a simple mistake, that they simply weren't up to the task of getting home?
No. This is the kind of relationship that we must have with our crew. The crew totally depends upon us to come up with the right answers. We depend upon them to provide the information and to execute. So this
no room for second guessing.
This relationship is absolute. Trust is really the key.
Go for the burn. We're burning 40%.
And the crew made the tricky maneuver like they'd done it 1,000 times.
I say that was a good burn.
Friday, April 17th, just hours from Earth now. The astronauts needed to get back into the command module. It had been shut down, frozen for days. Engineers on the ground were working feverishly on a way to start it up again.
Okay, system test 1A.
We went through 4 different versions of this checklist.
We have a procedure for getting power from the LEM. It's not a very long procedure.
And I got a little testy, and I said, look it, give us the proper information, no more, no less.
It was a critical time. Normally, the command module was powered up before launch, when electricity was unlimited. Never had a command module been shut down in flight, then restarted with just battery power. If the batteries died, so would the crew.
And you talk about this procedure, over 500 steps. And they had to then radio those steps, and they had to be written down one after the other.
We had no blank paper, so we had to rip covers and backs off of checklists and use that to write this checklist, which was very lengthy.
Now, checklist in hand, 3 cold, hungry, sleepless men had to execute it perfectly.
Okay, your go to start powering up the command module. Right, we're starting now.
The command module did come fully up, fully powered up.
Sigh of relief there. I mean, that's your ride home.
It was a ride home, ready or not.
Back in the command module now, less than 5 hours from Earth. The crew jettisoned the part of the spacecraft that exploded and nearly killed them all.
Copy that. Service module separation at 138 hours, 2 minutes, 8 seconds.
For the very first time, they could see just how bad the damage was.
As it floated away, finally just in front of us, we saw that the entire panel had been blown out.
And there's one whole side of that spacecraft missing. Right by the high gate antenna, the whole panel is blown out, almost from the base to the engine.
And that had to set off some fears in this room, that explosion also damaged the heat shield on the command module, because they sit right next to each other. And would they be able to survive re-entry?
In our line of business, you only worry about those things that you can do something about.
So all the things you had done for the 4 days prior, all the heroic efforts of everyone would have been for naught had there been a major flaw in that heat shield. It just wouldn't have mattered.
That's right. There's nothing we could do about it. Never could go outside to repair it or anything like that. So we just took it for granted that the heat shield was going to be intact.
Next, they jettisoned the LEM, their lifeboat, which they'd nicknamed Aquarius.
Well, Aquarius, thank you.
It was time.
Marilyn, you seem like a tough gal. However, there had to be times when you went over in your mind how you would tell the kids if it didn't turn out well.
Actually, I really don't believe I really thought about it because I really didn't give up. I just knew he would come back.
It had been the moon mission people ignored, and now the whole world was watching.
I couldn't breathe.
And we all just sat there and we just held our breath, and we held it with the world.
Apollo 13 plunged into the Earth's atmosphere on Friday, April 17th, after nearly 6 days in space. During re-entry, the 5,000-degree fireball surrounding the ship blacked out all radio transmissions.
The crew is now on their own. There are no more givebacks.
The blackout was expected to last 4 minutes.
Standing by for any reports of acquisition.
And there's no response. And we call again. It's now 1 minute since we should have heard from this crew.
Apollo 13 should be out of blackout at this time.
Every controller in this room is standing staring at those clocks on the wall. 1 minute and 27 seconds after we should have heard from the crew, we get a ray of hope.
Odyssey Houston, standing by, over. Okay, we read you, Jack.
And the emotional release in this room is so intense that literally every controller is standing crying.
Apollo 13 is practically on the dime.
When that spacecraft splashed down and water came over the windows, I said, hey, we're home.
Were there handshakes in the capsule? Were there tears? What was going on in there?
It was just quiet that we shook each other's hand and we said, hey, we made it again.
The capsule was still cold, even after entry. Smoky air, frosty air poured out of the hatch when the diver opened the hatch.
And this crew that had been living in a meat locker is finally out in the warm air of the South Pacific, and they are home and they are alive.
What was the first thing you said to Marilyn when you got back to Earth?
I said, you can't live without me.
You can't get rid of me that easy?
That's right.
But here are the facts of Apollo 13. To this day, 40 years later, no human beings have ever ventured farther from home. And to this day, no astronauts have overcome so many disasters, large and small, to make it back alive.